Welcome back and settle in. Let your mind slow, your breath deepen. The present world can wait. Tonight, we walk back through the marble gates of empire, not as rulers, not as sultans, but as shadows in the ranks. We'll drift through the quiet agony of forgotten barracks. We'll hear the slow rustle of forbidden scrolls behind silken doors. We'll witness the meeting of continents at the mouth of a cannon and the delicate swirl of coffee in a porcelain cup. This is the Ottoman Empire, but not the empire of postcards and palaces. This is the empire as it was lived, under pressure, in silence, in secret. And we begin with the boys who were taken and turned. Imagine you're 12, and the knock on the door isn't just a knock. It's a summons, a sentence. You are Christian in a village nestled somewhere in the Balkans, in what is now Albania, Serbia, or Greece. And the devshirm has come, the blood tax. A levy paid not in silver, but in sons. Every few years, the Ottoman Empire sent agents into its Christian provinces to collect promising young boys. They were chosen not for privilege, but for potential. Strong, bright, obedient. You didn't volunteer. You were selected. And then you vanished. The road to the barracks was long and quiet. Your name was stripped away, your language replaced. You would learn Turkish. You would learn Islam. You would not see your family again. They told you it was an honor to be molded into the elite, but honor in the Janissary corps came with silence and stone. You arrive at the asmrhistory, the school for novices. At first glance, it resembles a monastery more than a military camp. Thick walls, minimal speech, rows of shaved heads bent over wooden desks. Even laughter is a rarity here. Your days begin before the call to prayer, with icy water on your face and aching feet from the cold stone beneath your bedding. No cushion, no comfort, just the discipline of steel and the rhythm of drills. You are not merely being trained. You are being emptied of your past, your doubts, even your ability to imagine something else. You eat when told. You sleep when permitted. You do not ask questions. Each lesson comes with repetition. Sword drills under the weight of silence. Calligraphy under the watchful eye of a tutor who never smiles. Even the Quran becomes less a spiritual text and more a test of precision, recited flawlessly or not at all. There's no privacy. Even when relieving yourself, someone watches. Celibacy is demanded, not encouraged, a lifelong vow. Romantic entanglements, even friendships, are discouraged. The chorus wants loyalty to the Sultan alone. Punishment is swift and impersonal. A mistaken formation might mean fasting for a day. A dropped weapon could bring beatings with reeds. There are no trials, no appeals. Just the ever-present eyes of your instructors. Sleep is not rest. It is preparation. For tomorrow's march, for tomorrow's pain. You are one of thousands, identical uniforms, identical silence, and yet you are always alone. Some break under the pressure, not with screams or rebellion, but with withdrawal. A slow vanishing of the spirit, eyes that cease to meet others. Voices that recede into whispers, and still the training continues. You are not meant to think, you are meant to obey. You are becoming Janissary. Imagine the slow rumble of hooves across the Hungarian plain. The year is 1683, and the morning mist clings to thousands of tents pitched outside the walls of a city that has, for centuries, stood as the symbolic threshold between East and West. Vienna. This is not the Ottomans' first attempt to take the city. But this time, it's different. This time, they've brought the full weight of the empire with them. And as the sun rises over the Ottoman encampment, it catches the glint of polished armor, the taut strings of archers' bows, and rows of sleek, black cannons aimed straight at the future of Europe. But for now, there's quiet, a low chant in Arabic. A distant church bell muffled behind fortress walls. And beneath it all, the faint scent of cardamom coffee boiling in a brass pot. The Siege of Vienna in 1683 is a turning point, not just militarily, but culturally, spiritually, gastronomically. It was more than a battle. It was a collision, two worlds, two empires, one line in the dirt. You might think of this as East versus West, Islam versus Christendom, but the reality is far murkier. Many of the Ottomans' finest troops were converts, men born Christian, raised to fight for the Sultan. And within Vienna's walls were not only Austrians, but mercenaries from Spain, Poland, and even Muslim Tatars. Religion mattered. But so did politics. So did money. Sultan Mehmed IV was not present. He delegated the siege to Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha, a man ambitious enough to gamble the reputation of the entire empire. He was determined to make Vienna the jewel in the Sultan's crown, but his pride would prove to be his undoing. The siege was a masterpiece of slow violence. Ottoman sappers, highly trained diggers, began tunneling under the walls of Vienna. They packed the tunnels with barrels of gunpowder, intending to blow massive holes in the city's defenses. But the Viennese knew the trick, and so they counterdug. Imagine the quiet terror of that underground war. Dark tunnels lit only by flickering oil lamps. The sound of distant picks scratching against stone. Every vibration a possible explosion. Every breath a countdown. When the charges were detonated, the earth trembled. Sections of Vienna's wall crumbled, but still the defenders held. Meanwhile, above ground, a different game played out. Spies slipped through enemy lines, carrying coded messages and troop movements. Letters written in lemon juice, revealed only by fire. Fake deserters sowing disinformation. Even couriers hidden in barrels of flour. Vienna was surrounded, but not cut off. And help was coming. On September 12, 1683, after 2 months of siege, relief finally came. A coalition army of Poles, Germans, and Lithuanians, led by King Jan III Sobieski of Poland, arrived on the hills outside Vienna. At dawn, Sobieski unleashed the winged hussars, a cavalry force unlike anything the Ottomans had faced before. You might hear their arrival before you see them, the pounding hooves, the metallic rattle of feathers strapped to their backs, not for flight, but for fear. A psychological weapon meant to terrify both horse and man. The charge was massive. Thousands of riders descending on the Ottoman camp in a wave of iron and death. And suddenly, Kara Mustafa's army, which had once numbered over 100,000, was in full retreat. The siege was broken, but the story doesn't end with battle. As the Ottomans fled, they left behind weapons, tents, gold, and bags of strange black beans. At first, the Viennese thought they were camel feed, but one man, a Polish officer named Jerzy Franciszek Kolczycki, recognized the value. He had spent time in the East. He had tasted it. He understood that the future wasn't just swords and treaties, it was coffee. And so, not long after the siege, the first Viennese coffee house opened, modeled after the Ottoman cafes Kolczycki had seen in Istanbul. Soft cushions, low tables, spiced brews, a space for conversation, for politics, for poetry, and of course, for secrets. Thus, the bitter drink of the Ottomans became a symbol of European modernity. So, what was the Siege of Vienna really? A battle, yes, but also a moment of osmosis where cultures bled into each other without ever admitting it, where the cannonball was followed by the coffee cup, where enemies left behind aromas, rituals, and architecture. History is rarely clean, and in the muddy fields outside Vienna, the East did not vanish. It simply changed form, drifting into kitchens, into language, into habits. And so, the next time you sip a cup of coffee, remember that it might have once boiled in a Janissary pot, beside a cannon, under siege. Imagine yourself walking barefoot through a corridor lit only by oil lamps. Each step echoes against cool marble. The air smells of parchment and dust, and something older, incense, ink, a trace of burnt rosemary, once believed to keep demons at bay. This is not a mosque, not a library in the way you'd imagine one today. You are in a forgotten annex of the Soleimani complex, nestled in the heart of Istanbul. It is the 16th century, and somewhere beyond these shelves, knowledge breathes, hidden, copied, smuggled, feared. The Soleimani library was, and still is, one of the great treasure troves of the Islamic world. Built under the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, it was more than a place of learning. It was an extension of his power, a place where scholars served just as chefs or architects did, by perfecting their craft in service of the empire. But not all books were meant to be read. Some were kept locked in chests, others were chained to walls. Not because they were valuable, but because they were dangerous. These were the scrolls whispered about in corridors, books that taught astrology, alchemy, occult healing, and ancient curses. Scrolls whose pages rustled even when no wind stirred. They were not to be destroyed, only kept. The men who copied them, known as katips, lived quiet, structured lives. Imagine rows of them seated cross-legged, bent over long wooden desks, each equipped with sharpened reed pens, bowls of indigo and gold pigment, and burnished leather covers. They wrote by candlelight, and they never signed their names. Some were polyglots translating Greek, Persian, Hebrew, even Sanskrit. Others specialized in the more arcane, copying diagrams of planetary alignments, talismans etched with protective prayers, or anatomical sketches flanked by lists of herbs and their spiritual temperaments. Each scroll was copied perfectly, line by line. Mistakes were forbidden. But sometimes a symbol would appear, faint, subtle, outside the margins. A single eye. A coiled serpent. A triangle intersecting with the word for wind. Were these the scribes' private jokes? Their warnings? Or something older passed down from hand to hand? We'll never know. Some scrolls detailed ancient healing practices, mixtures of animal fat, dried figs, and rose water. Others prescribed rituals for protection, placing iron nails under pillows, chanting verses during eclipses, burning sandalwood during childbirth. Then came the Grey Book, a codex of uncertain origin, rumored to be bound in human skin. Yes, you heard that right. Several such texts were believed to exist across both Europe and Middle East. Whether true or apocryphal, their existence was noted, catalogued, and kept in real records, usually marked with a seal, but no name. The Soleimani copy is now lost. Some believe it was hidden in the Yerebatin cisterns, sealed in a wax-lined box, protected by a verse written backwards in Old Arabic. Others think it was burned, or stolen during the Allied occupation after World War I. But fragments remain, descriptions in letters, sketches in the margins of other texts, and one scribe's personal journal discovered in 1892 that describes a book that hums when touched like wind against copper. Whatever it was, it's no longer with us, at least not in public. Today, the Soleimani library is open to researchers. You can walk through it, browse some digitized manuscripts, even request rare texts. But there are whispers, even now, of a hidden catalog, only accessible by referral, passed hand to hand by aging scholars and custodians. A collection of the empire's strangest records, a journal of dreams compiled by a 17th century Sufi mystic, a treatise on shadow summoning, annotated in red ink, a star chart that doesn't match the night sky, a record of palace exorcisms from the court of Murad IV. None of this has been confirmed, and maybe that's the point. In the Ottoman world, knowledge was power, but it was also politics. Sultans patronized scholars, not just for learning, but for control. Controlling what people could read, what they could know, and more subtly what they could fear. In this way, the Suleimani scrolls were not simply books. They were tools, weapons, relics, and even now, centuries later, their presence can still be felt in the pages of history, or in the echo of turning parchment, or in the sensation that something is missing, a page, a line, a truth. Some things were never meant to be found, only remembered. And so, if your eyes are heavy now, drifting from ink to sleep, know that the story of these scrolls is not over. It simply rests, waiting to be read again. The harem. Just the word stirs 1,000 imagined images, most of them wrong. This wasn't simply a place of seduction and silk. It was a fortress of rules, a maze of marble and whispers, a kingdom within a kingdom, and you weren't invited. But tonight, you'll enter through the quietest door. Imagine it's just after sundown in Topkapi Palace, sometime in the 17th century. The outer courtyards have gone still. Janissaries murmur at their posts, fires burn low in brass braziers. And somewhere deep within the private heart of the complex, the harem stirs to life, not with noise, but with routine. Not chaos, but choreography, because here every glance is calculated, every step rehearsed, and every word might echo longer than intended. To enter the harem was not an invitation to luxury. It was a contract, silent and binding. Most women brought here were not born in Istanbul. They came from the Caucasus, the Balkans, North Africa, and beyond. Many were taken as tribute, others sold by desperate families or caught in war. Almost all were young, and almost none ever left. You were renamed, your language erased. You were taught to bow, walk, speak, eat, exactly as the harem dictated. From the outside, it looked like opulence. Domed ceilings, Iznik tiles, embroidered pillows, carved lattice windows. But beneath it all, this was a hierarchy more rigid than any military. Imagine waking every morning to the sound of sandals tapping down mosaic corridors. The valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother, ruled over all. She lived in the grandest apartments and had more power than most viziers. Below her were the Khadans, the official consorts. Then came the Iqbals, the favorites. And finally, hundreds of concubines who might never even see the Sultan's face. Each woman had a specific task. Some served tea, some arranged flowers, some memorized entire poetry collections in case the Sultan requested a verse. Meals were served on lacquered trays. Silence was expected unless spoken to, and the smallest mistake, a spilled cup, an out-of-turn phrase, could be a career-ending offense. You lived surrounded by gold, but walked on glass. This was not a place of passive beauty. The harem was a political engine. Many of these women wielded extraordinary power from behind embroidered curtains. They arranged marriages, pushed sons toward succession, whispered into the Sultan's ear when viziers failed. Harem Sultan, for example, a former concubine, became the legal wife of Sultan Suleiman and practically co-ruled the empire. She wrote diplomatic letters, funded mosques, and outmaneuvered rivals until her own son took the throne. But such influence came with danger. There were rumors of sleeping powders slipped into sherbets, of poisoned hairpins traded between rivals, of concubines locked away in the cage, a secluded apartment where princes and potential threats were quietly made to disappear. All of it whispered in the language of silk. But what was it really like to live here, day after day, year after year? You woke with a call to prayer. You washed in cold marble basins. You prayed, trained, rehearsed dances. You sewed for hours. Not just clothes, but embroidered verses, miniature tapestries, prayers on silk. You learned to read body language better than any spy, because the arch of a brow or the angle of a fan could change your future. You might never see the city outside. Only tiled walls and painted ceilings and the faces of the same women over and over. But the stories, they spread like fire. A girl elevated from chambermaid to royal favorite in a week. Another cast out in disgrace, a quiet one who knew every secret and said nothing. Keeping this world sealed were the black eunuchs, enslaved men, castrated and trained to protect the harem. They had no families, no ambitions beyond duty, but they were powerful. The chief black eunuch held sway over access to the Sultan himself. He managed communications, finances, and discipline. He knew everything and told no one. Imagine walking past him each day, knowing he knew where you stood and how far you might fall. Topkapi's harem was not a fantasy. It was a system designed to isolate, to control, to produce heirs, and occasionally, very occasionally, to elevate a woman beyond anything her past life could be imagined. But for most, it was a place where time flowed slowly, where gossip was currency, where your name might never leave the palace walls, and where even laughter had to be measured. So if you were here, living among tiled walls and candlelit rooms, your days would blend together. Perfume and prayers, politics and sulk. Rituals repeated until they became invisible. But behind every embroidered curtain, something watched, waited, listened. A palace within a palace. A history written in whispers. And now you find yourself back at the edge of it all. The barracks, the battlefield, the libraries, the lattice windows of the harem, all fading slowly into the hush of memory. You've wandered through stone corridors where boys became soldiers, where silence was taught before speech, where loyalty was not a virtue but a demand. You've stood beneath the smoke of cannons at Vienna, watching diplomacy and destruction play out in the same breath, where something as delicate as coffee could outlive the thunder of war. You've peered into forgotten archives where scrolls were copied by candlelight and where knowledge was treasured, even when it was feared. A world of scribes and spells, bound pages and stolen words. And you've passed through the velvet quiet of the Sultan's harem, where power dressed itself in perfume and protocol, where every whisper was a weapon and every woman lived between walls of gold and expectation. Together, these stories form more than history. They form a texture, a rhythm, the heartbeat of an empire that moved on silent feet and left behind echoes instead of monuments. Because not all history is loud. Sometimes the real stories are told in the spaces between the clash of swords and the shuffle of feet, between the poetry written and the words left unsaid, between the rise of marble walls and the lives hidden quietly behind them. So as the night deepens and your eyes grow heavier, remember this. The Janissary, the scribe, the concubine, the eunuch, they all lived entire lives within structures built to contain them. They learned to find small freedoms in strict places, to feel moments of peace among rituals, routines, and rules. And maybe, just maybe, we still do the same. You too live among systems. You navigate halls of power, unseen expectations, inherited traditions. And you find meaning not always in the grand gestures, but in the quiet corners, the in-between places, the breath before action, the silence after a story ends. Let it be enough now. Let the sounds fade. Let the stone halls go dark. Let the candle flicker once and go out. And when you wake, tomorrow or much later, the story will still be here, waiting, like all the others buried beneath the palaces of history. Good night. And welcome back to the Insomnia Archive.